Okay, so we're back, and last week we talked quite a bit about therapy, what specifically what therapy is, and a couple of the specific mental health concerns that came into the conversation were anxiety and depression and substance abuse and addiction, because that's your specialty.
Yeah.
So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that today, if that works for you.
Sure.
And again, as I want to start every show, this is a podcast. This is not specifically medical advice. Um, it's a conversation. It's a way to bring up a conversation that is not being had enough out in the world. And so, being that this is kind of your specialty, and ironically, as you know, my sister, my oldest sister, is also in the industry of helping with substance abuse and addiction. Has been for many years and does some other things now as well. But for the listeners, what are some things that from your perspective as a professional in the industry and an expert on this subject that maybe people aren't talking about that we should know? Those of us that aren't professionals in the industry, what are some things that we should know?
Oh goodness, that's such a broad question.
It is, and it's a broad topic, and that's why we want to talk about it. And you know what? If it takes many shows, hopefully we're going to get lots of engagement. Please, if you're out there and this is something that you're dealing with personally or in your family or close friends, reach out to us and engage in this conversation. Um, Number one, it gives us a way to be specific to the individual, to the listener, which is what we want. Um, but that's what we're looking for is engagement.
Right.
So just a couple of things off the top of your head that are common.
Yeah, I think. I mean, there. When we use the word addiction, I think people initially, uh, what comes to mind are substances, and there actually are different categories of addiction. There is obviously a substance based addiction where the person their tolerance to the substance begins to increase, thereby reducing the um, experience that they get from the substance that they're ingesting. They become dependent on that substance in order to not feel sick or to attempt to regulate their moods or their regulatory system, their sleep, and their arousal system. Um, they need more and more of the substance in order to feel a certain
Yeah.
result. But there are also process addictions that do not require the use of a substance. And many of us are experience those. We're not even aware that we are so dependent on them to regulate our moods because it's so accepted and integrated into society. And those are process addictions, and that can be
Social media.
uh-huh. Or even, that's very specific. Just the process addiction of being on one's phone, whatever they're doing on the phone, right? It could be compulsively checking your email. It could be going on social media. It could be, do you know how many people I see that just send out text messages to people? Hi, hey, hey. They're just wanting that like dopamine hit from having another
Yeah.
person respond to them. But why? Like, what is this about? And I think more and more what we see in the field of addiction or in this category is a person's difficulty with tolerating their own emotion, their own feeling. And so they're attempting to change the way they feel either by using a substance, which is very effective, by the way. Which is why people do it. It's also, it creates its own evil as well. Um, but
Sure.
but also an attempt to change the way they feel by getting a certain amount of likes or reaching out to other people for validation. Um, but but with both of these, what they have in common is the reaching outside of oneself to regulate. Um, I mean, it really is about affect regulation. It really is about the way a person feels and their inability to regulate their emotional states without input from the outside.
Right, right. That is that is a fantastic way of explaining it. In So I've had quite a few of these conversations lately, over the last couple of years, obviously, in both in just general settings, friends, family, literally people on the street. I mean, the the interesting thing, we've heard all of this, social distancing stuff, and however, it's like people are craving connection.
Mm-hmm.
They're craving it, and we've all heard this. Everybody's heard this. It's all over the place that addiction itself, substance abuse specifically, has increased drastically. And I do not have stats on that available. I did not. I didn't try to go down that path for today's show. Be happy to do that for anybody that wants to really dig into that. But we know that people are craving for connection now. And I would say I agree. Most of what we hear of it in addiction wise is, gambling would be another one. Um, there are definitely some other addictions that are discussed out there. Be it of the more private nature, so to speak. Porn addictions, things like that. And but social media and that dopamine hit is definitely one. What do you see as a very common thing that people understand and are willing to reach out and look for help for? Is there anything other than substance abuse or is that kind of the primary thing you see?
It's it's interesting that you say that. Usually when people pick up the phone to make a call and say, hey, I need to get into treatment, they've reached capacity. Either they're out of money, they're out of family support, they're out of dope, they're out of all of the things that are going to support the system to maintain the addictive process. um Ironically, I don't know that we spoke about this, but I'm the director of an addiction treatment center, and at the within the facility, we go over, we do an intake. It's very thorough. It's whole drug history. We go over all of the uglies, all of the shameful things, and people are very transparent and to really willing to go through this process when we let them know that they will not be able to have access to their phone and their computer is when I hit the point of most resistance. And
So
people will be like, whoa, like,
so
whoa.
so hold on.
I don't know. Like, I may give up drugs and alcohol. I can give up, you know, all sorts of things, but not the phone.
See, like, that is so interesting because what I'm hearing so much lately, um, and nobody's, like, it's being talked about. Like, people don't seem to be taking it as serious that is really an addiction. And again, there's so much to it. So let's talk about the ones that truly, that are the more popular ones that people recognize. And of course, I always look at things, this from a mindset perspective. Let's say that I have a substance abuse um, concern. Again, how do I recognize, um, beyond, okay, this is really affecting me, meaning I'm hungover and I'm not going to work. How do I recognize in myself or in someone else when I should get help, or what could I maybe do to head it off even before it gets to that point?
That's a great question. In terms of heading it off before it gets to that point, I think people do generally have some understanding that they are certainly abusing a substance even before it gets to the point where they might say, I'm addicted. When they start to use substances abusively. I used to have a client, he actually passed away, and he used to say, I feel so jealous of those people who could just use normally. Like, I wish I could just shoot dope like a gentleman. That's how he would say
Wow.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, he couldn't, if he would get high, he would be in the gutter. Like he couldn't, he was not a functional addict by any means. So, there are a variety of markers and ways that we evaluate whether or not a person is addicted or not. But what I generally say is the degree to which it's impacting one's life. That is my first rule of thumb. Like, tell me what's happening in your life, right? If a person comes home and they say, I come home, I have a glass of wine, maybe I have 2 glasses of wine, and I do it every night, and it doesn't impact my life. Are they addicted to it? They could be. Is it destroying their lives? It doesn't sound like it.
Yeah.
Does that person need to go into rehab? I guess they would need to go into rehab to stop if they wanted to stop and they couldn't, or if it were causing distress in their life. But it sounds like a habit. It sounds like they could be addicted to it, but is it interfering, or are their relationships being impacted? Are they getting DUIs? Are they not able to go to work the next day? Are they blacking out? Is their health affected? These are all the things that one takes into consideration with making the decision as to whether or not they want to make a change.
We would hope they take them into consideration.
We would hope, yes, we would.
I say that in with the purest of intent, because I've had my own experiences, alcohol and some of the light stuff back in the day, before it became legal. Uh, when I was a kid, and I say a kid, meaning, well, actually, I was a kid. I was literally a kid. Um, I remember in my early 20s, I used to go to the club, and a friend of mine. Um, we would go, we knew everybody there, and we'd have a couple of drinks, and that was it. And there was a particular, I don't know, maybe summer or whatever time of year it was, there was a few month period where we had started drinking a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And one night they threw a dollar drink night the whole night. And the bill was $39 for dollar drinks.
Mm.
There was two of us. So I looked at my friend, hello, Randy, if you're listening. And I said, wow, who else, did you buy drinks for? Because I sure didn't get anybody else a drink. And he said, just your buddy Bob, which was a guy that I had known and introduced him to that night. He bought him one drink. So that was 38 drinks between him and I, 19 apiece. And I looked at him. I said, this is crazy. He said, no, actually, I think it's right. Like, we were both able to walk out of that building. I got a ride. There was no way, even though I felt okay, there was no way I was getting in a car. And I told him right then, I'm not drinking anymore for a while. This is insane that I would have. I'm not talking beers. I don't even drink beer. These were liquor drinks. How in the world could I get to where I could handle 19 drinks and not be laid out on the
Yeah.
floor?
I mean, either they really watered it down or you had worked methodically in increasing your tolerance.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, they knew us. The bartenders were our friends, so chances are they were watering other people's drinks down and not necessarily ours.
Yeah.
They anyway. The point being, I recognized it. I stopped it right away. But I've known people that go through a case of beer in a day, every single day. A case, 24 beers. That's insane to me.
It's a lot of peeing also.
Yeah, you would think so.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of one gentleman in particular many years ago, that was the father of a friend of mine from high school, actually, and another buddy of mine worked with him, and he used to say the guy made him drive every day, and he would sit there and he would first thing stop at the store, or whatever, and he would buy a case, and he would drink the whole thing throughout the day,
Yeah.
and he was able to function. He was able to work. Like, he had a very physically demanding job,
Mm-hmm.
business that he ran. He ran his business. He did the job at the customer's place of business. They would go from place to place. And so, very functioning. Did it affect his life, his health? For sure. I'm sorry you can't drink, 20 plus beers a day and not have it affect your health, but he was functioning. But that to me, that has to be an alcoholic.
Well,
I mean,
so I think what one might expect to see is if he was not drinking, he would not be functioning. He would start to go through withdrawals. He would start shaking. He would start perspiring. Actually, alcohol is quite dangerous to detox from without medical assistance in doing so. Um,
didn't know that.
so yeah, yeah. Actually, alcohol and benzodiazepines are two substances that have to be monitored and assisted. Oftentimes, people who are going through heroin or most specifically heroin withdrawal, they'll say like, "I feel like I'm going to die." They're not going to die from the withdrawal. They'll die from the use. They won't die from the withdrawal. They feel like it, but alcohol and benzos are two substances that absolutely require um, subacute detox and medication support. But um, yeah, so often, people they're addicted and they have to drink in order to become functional.
To self-regulate.
Yeah.
So, as you know, I look at it from a mindset perspective, and I find it interesting. But just from a mindset perspective, because obviously you deal with that. Like, what could we what kind of conversation could we have with someone that maybe is at that level where they are functional because they're doing it, and how could we encourage them to recognize a little more deeply what it is they're doing to, themselves, their bodies, their lives by, I don't know. I don't even know what question to ask in it. Like,
Like, how do we bring into their awareness that they're maybe doing something that is not benign?
yeah,
Yeah.
like, if they're saying, "What do you mean? I'm fine. I go to work every day," and it's like, yeah, okay, try to get through 2 or 3 days without it. And their excuse is, "Why would I do that? I enjoy it." And they don't even, maybe they know they're addicted, but they just don't want to admit it out loud, or maybe they don't even realize because they're functioning. They don't realize they won't be able to function if they don't do that because they never give it a try. Is there something that those of us that come across, friends or family in that situation could maybe share to encourage them?
That's a hard one, because immediately a person will become the tendency and the fear would be that they would become defensive. And once a person starts to defending their beloved, and it is their beloved, by the way, it is having a the substance really becomes the most intimate relationship. It is the most relied upon, most tried and true, most consistent relationship that the person has. Actually, oftentimes in treatment, we ask our clients to write breakup letters or to write goodbye letters to the substance. And when you read them, it reads like a romantic partner.
That is so interesting. This is a little off, but I've actually done that with a couple of people that where we were trying to break habits. But yeah, that that's an interesting way to look at it. Um,
But to answer the question, like what do you do? Tread lightly. And that's what I would say. Don't approach it by saying, "Hey, I noticed you really drink a lot." Like that is a surefire way of getting somebody on the opposite side of you. Um, for us, I mean, one of the best ways of approaching a person who may need treatment and is not yet uh, presenting with a certain readiness for change, we use a certain technique called motivational interviewing. And really we use that to try to help the individual come up with their own motivation. So we have a conversation with them where about it in a way that's very non-threatening. So there's no need for them to defend it. We are almost endorsing what they're saying. No, it really helps me relax. Yeah, that's great. I can understand that. Like you work hard. Yeah, it makes sense that you'd want to come home and have a few beers or a case. Yeah, that makes sense, you know.
yeah,
Um, but once that's been endorsed, then we switch gears a little bit and we might say is so it sounds like it works for you like in a lot of ways. I can totally get that. It makes sense. Is there any part of it that maybe doesn't make that much sense or because you know you and and oftentimes they will come up with it on their own. The place you don't want to be is saying, dude, this is bad. Like your liver, I mean, whew, you
yeah,
know, like, yeah, like alcohol's a neurotoxin. Like these are just not the conversations that one should be having with someone who's not expressing a motivation for change.
yeah, yeah. That's true, and I like the way you said tread lightly. I mean there is, I'll say nothing but truth in that, because a lot of the time we say, look, just hit it head on, confront them, right? There's and that's in many things other than even just addiction or specifically substance abuse, but um, honestly, there was a time that I had gotten into what everybody calls gaming, right? Video games, as a way to try to relate to one of my stepsons at the time. And, it kind of worked in a way, but I could never play like him. So I sucked and he was amazing at it. Um, and he truly was. He was like really good. I think he actually turned it into a career now. But that being said, there were I started to understand the addiction to this. Like
Hmm.
it literally, you get to live another life in some of these games, and I would be up
It's an
until
escape.
yeah, I would be up
Yeah.
until 4 in the morning, the sun would be coming up, and I'd be like, oh crap, I need to get an hour or two sleep so I can function at work tomorrow. Yeah, weekdays, not just weekends. It was insane, and I finally was like, what am I doing? You know, mid 40s. I'm addicted to this game, and it was literally it was like living the particular game was literally like living another life.
Mm.
And quite frankly, I got to be the hero in the game.
Hmm.
And this is something that I caught on to fairly quickly, but yeah, and it was that how you said an intimate relationship. Like
Hmm.
these are characters in a game that have like simple responses, and yet they felt like friends. It was really weird,
Hmm.
and how
Well,
quickly it happened.
yeah, especially the games now are, you know, when I was a kid growing up, we had
Pac-Man,
Pac-Man and we had Mrs. Pac-Man and we had
Frogger.
Frog. Yeah, we had, you know, try to get the frog across. So it was just me and the video game. Now we're really, it's so interactive. There are people that there are communities.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
true.
there are other people who are operating those things. It's a, it's a you're living life through the video game and interacting with other people who are making decisions. It's their
Yeah.
communities. It's a very different experience.
And you literally, so that was so interesting. It's like you read my mind. You went exactly where I wanted to take this. Why I brought it up in the first place was the community part. And because that's part of what I caught on to was the reason that I even did it in the first place was to make a connection, was with a single particular individual. But I see this with people that talk about it till this to this day, and friends and coworkers and clients that I've known over the years. It gives them something to talk about. It gives
Mm-hmm.
them a something in common. What's the old one? Dungeons and Dragons or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I mean, my goodness, people literally they were living their life through
Mm-hmm.
this game. It was like for years. And I've never played it. I don't know what it's about, but I recognized years ago that the way they use that seemed to me it was like a substance abuse. It became this intimate part of their life. And it's interesting because when you said that earlier, I thought you said something. I want to say you used the words something they could count on, and that's where it makes the most sense to me. It's for those that use, they know what to expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually the I often say that when people are going through substance abuse treatment, and I remember in the early days people was like, "Oh my gosh, that must be so hard to work with people who are going through, withdrawals from substances." Like firstly, I'm not the medical doctor, so I'm just reporting the symptoms over to the doctor, and he's prescribing the medication to make sure that they're safe and comfortable. But truth be told, within a very short period of time, the substance is out of the person's system. The most difficult part is not managing the detox. The most difficult time is managing the absence and the void that is left behind once the substance is no longer playing that part. It's a very loud void. And substances for the most part are really used to calibrate and change a person's feeling states. So they have to learn how to change that feeling state from the inside out.
Yeah,
And that is they become their own intimate. They have to become their own intimate. They have to become their own expert on themselves. They have to invest in creating that relationship and and learning to tolerate that which feels intolerable until they're able to recognize this this too will not kill me. The substance actually will kill them,
yeah,
but the feeling won't, although um it takes a little while to get there, and it takes a lot of dedication to get there.
yeah, yeah. And that's interesting because I worked, over the years, I worked with a lot of people on, you know, creating new habits, on recognizing where they're at and the things that they want. So I have a process that I use where we sit down and it's, well, it wouldn't be quite like motivational interviewing, though I do that at one stage as well, something very similar, but it's sitting down and looking at like personal identity. Okay, who are you in your life in all aspects? And I know I've shared this with you in just general conversation before. One way I look at it is, let's say we're talking about work, right? And some people, I've known people over the years that they have to have a drink before they go to work or whatever their substance of choice is. They will leave and they will go sneak something at break or at lunch because that was their form of self-regulation to
Mm-hmm.
deal with whatever the stresses were at work. And And then they'd say, oh, I want to quit. It's like trying to quit cigarette smoking. The problem is they have this physiological thing that they're used to doing now where their body craves just that action
Mm-hmm.
along with everything else. That goes beyond my scope of explaining, but the physical movement of
Mm-hmm.
this, like your body's used to it. It wants it. And I have even worked with a couple people that from from a smoking perspective, and we've talked about, I've had many conversations about it, is look, you can find ways to do it, but you can't just get rid of something because then there's this void. It needs to be replaced with something else. What, from your perspective, how would you help somebody?
Right. It hits to the essence of really what this is about. So, with you were saying with smoking, it's like that, hand to mouth, repetitive, automated um, ritual. So with substances, the removal of the substance has to be replaced with an alternative way of regulating a person's emotional experience. What's the best way of doing that? In relationship. And so that's why support groups like AA, NA, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, these different 12-step programs, they are so wise and so brilliant and so effective. What's the slogan? Like, it works if you work it.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
if an individual follows that program, it's a program of healthy living, of integrity, of gaining one's integrity back after having lost it. Um, it's about connecting with other people. The system is set up so that a person gets a sponsor. It's basically like saying, like, will you be my best friend?
Yeah.
And that person, that oftentimes the way that those relationships work, the sponsor will say to the sponsee, I want you to call me every day. We're going to meet once a week. It is just such a beautiful process that builds connection. Also, going to meetings creates community,
Yeah.
belonging, normalizing of one's experience so they don't feel quite as shameful. They don't feel quite as hopeless and helpless. So, and what happens is through that an individual is able to experience many different states of emotion, some high, some low, but they're able to really navigate that without the use of a substance.
Yeah.
So that's what it's really replaced by, because again, the substance it's an affect regulator. That's what people use it for. Like, oh, I feel down. Let me take this, or I feel so great. Let me have a drink. Why?
Yeah.
Right? Well, because I don't actually know how to feel this feeling having without having it enhanced or changed in some way.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm interrupting, but like
No, please.
you just nailed like everything about where where how I look at this. That is, here's this person that doesn't know how to feel this, doesn't know how to regulate, doesn't know how to experience something, and therefore they choose this one item that says, I know what to expect from this. So no matter what else I'm going through, something that's uncomfortable, I can take this. I can, whether it's a taste, right? How many times do we say a smell or a taste or a sound reminds us of something from being a kid, right? It's something familiar, something that we know what to expect from it. So if we're in an uncomfortable position, we grab this, we gravitate towards something, in this case a substance, that says, this this helps me find that level place that I recognize. And so I say this all the time. I've said this for years. to me, life boils down to two things, and it's our mindset and it's our relationships,
Mm-hmm.
relationships with ourselves. Like I was saying earlier at work, I use a way of talking to people to say, you know, who are you at work, right? And they name their title. Always, it's always a title. No, no, no. Who are you? Like at home, you're not. I go by the title dad or sir or I'm just mom. No, you're a mom, you're a wife, you're a sister, you're a daughter, you're a this, you know, you're all these things. At work, we're the same things. And if we start to recognize, to me, and again, I definitely don't deal with substance abuse, and that's the topic for today, but I try to look at it from a mindset perspective. If we learn to regulate how we think about the actions that we're taking, meaning the use of the substance, if we don't just look at the substance, but we really ask ourselves, why am I doing this? And that's why I smiled real big when you said the motivational interviewing is saying, okay, I get it. Of course, it makes sense that that works for you, but maybe what doesn't? What about it is not working? What could be used in place of that? Is there something else that gives you that same feeling? Maybe something that they're not even recognizing. They've never, hey, I know a handful of people that, specifically men, but I probably know a couple women right off the top of my head if I really thought, that gave up substances and are absolute gym rats. Okay, the yoga, going to the gym, whatever. That is what they use to get that hit instead, which of course now is a healthy thing
Mm-hmm.
instead of, you know, um, long term, especially unhealthy. What would you, from a more clinical perspective and professional perspective, say to something like that? Like actively engaging to, pull someone in a different
I think
direction,
we can always be a
influence them.
good influence, in a person's life. I think again, it if they've crossed over, as nice as you are, as nice as you might be to look at or to hang out with, you're just not going to be, you know, the
Just not that 16 ounces,
no,
whatever,
you're not.
whatever it is,
Yeah,
that puff,
32,
that hit, that
48,
I don't
whatever.
know.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on how far along they are in their process, in their how deep they are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, the as we say, um, the point of this podcast is to open a conversation, to have conversations that may or may not be being had out there, to get some engagement, to have those that are watching, listening, whatever your platform is, to reach out and say, hey, I've experienced this personally. I've been through it. Me by personally, I mean, I had that addiction, whatever kind it was, substances or otherwise, or I lived through that, or I shared in that. And just to be able to ask questions or to share some experiences that maybe someone else can relate to, be it, via an email that we can respond to, be it comments, again, depending upon the platform, but a proactive takeaway for anyone. Let's say two sides. One, a person that maybe is at a point where they're willing to recognize, yeah, I probably do engage in this particular activity or this particular substance a little more than I should. And then number two, somebody who recognizes, hey, I have a friend or a loved one or someone that I believe is in that, a takeaway that they can implement tomorrow,
Hmm.
literally,
Hmm.
today as they
So
hear this.
people often say that addiction or alcoholism is a self-diagnosing disease. So, in other words, if a person thinks like, "Ooh, you know what? I'm partaking a little bit more than I should." My first uh, line of advice, I think, would be to say, "Well, see what it's like to not. Like, see what comes up. Just try it on. Let's see what that feels like. If you think you're drinking a little bit too frequently, or that you're smoking too much pot, or you're, whatever it is, see what it's like to not do it. And are you able to do that? Are you not able to do that? That's the first thing. The second thing, if an individual has a loved one that they believe may be, have crossed over to the dark side, to the addictive side, um, I would probably, if it were my loved one, I think I would, depending on the nature of the relationship, but I think saying, I noticed that you seem to be struggling a bit. I'm wondering if it would be helpful for you to speak to a therapist. And and go from there. I think it it's really, really hard for family members to be the keeper or the enforcer of a person's sobriety or mental health. It just puts us all in these really awful, estranged, yucky
Yeah.
places where it's like, confrontation and codependency, and just, it's just, we don't want to go there. So, um, if we have a loved one, I that is struggling, or we believe may be struggling, I would say suggest that they get to a mental health professional, specifically a mental health professional who has some expertise in addiction or substance
In that
abuse.
area.
Yeah.
So that's why, to me, this conversation was important, because the reality is it is a big thing now. I mean, Lord knows I've had loved ones. Just actually, one of them, we just passed a year that
Mm-hmm.
um, lost his life
Mm-hmm.
to fentanyl.
Mm-hmm. It's such a common story. It's unfortunate. It's painful. Fentanyl is I think it's the number one killer of young people in this country.
Yeah, I've heard that as of last year and this year. And you know what though? It's the interesting thing is, and you know more about this than me, and we won't get into it too much. We'll wrap up today here in a minute, but I, some of the other things that people engage in, like, those are the first steps, and we never think it's going to lead to something worse. But I know my experience back, even as a kid, you know, I saw my older siblings and older friends, older siblings, smoking cigarettes. So I tried it. And then I saw them drinking. So I tried it. And then I saw them, smoking pot. So I tried it. And one thing led to another. And my high school years were, what's the word, laden? They were, it wasn't a sprinkle. It was a habit. It was a really bad habit. And then I decided it right before I turned 17, I was going into the military. And on my 17th birthday, I quit everything. I was able to do that,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of people aren't. I literally just said, I'm not touching a thing. I was at a birthday party. I had a birthday party thrown for me, and everybody there was partying. And I said, absolutely not. And you know what? Luckily, a couple of my friends were like, come on, one last time. But when I said no, they supported me in it. And I think that's something that was a huge, huge difference. Like, I knew I had to be clean, or they wouldn't have let me in the military. They would have tested when I tested for anything. They would have been like, heck no. Um, but I wanted to jump out of airplanes and didn't get to do that
Mm-hmm.
either. Uh, Point being, and you know what? You know this. A lot of people that come out of the military come out with some pretty bad habits.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's something we'll talk about in an upcoming show, PTSD and all of the things that a lot of those individuals deal with. But definitely, as always, thank you for your insight on that. Please, 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 if you are watching, it doesn't matter what your experience is. This is to create a conversation, whether it be to help you or just sharing a story, something you can share that we can then filter out to with others. That something you could share that maybe helps other people. Um, and I know I would love to have one day. I would love to have my sister call in or
Mm-hmm.
participate
Mm-hmm.
in a session with us because she has so much experience in this. And you know what? She's got hundreds of people that she's worked with over the years, and community
Mm-hmm.
um, from that um, I'm sure a lot of them will wind up listening to this at some point, um, and call in. You know what? Doesn't matter if you're somebody that is connected to Maxine or myself, or again, my sister. If she comes on the show, I'm sure she will. She dedicates her entire life to helping people with these types of concerns. But I think the public itself and the average person that's not actively engaged in this needs to know more, and they need to know that it's okay. Tread lightly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's okay to have those conversations. And really, if we love people, if these are people that we care about, we should be having the conversations. We should be searching out ways to have the conversations. And don't anybody can reach out to us and say, look, I have someone um, I'd like to talk to, and I know they're defensive, or I've already tried to talk to and they're defensive. What else can I do? And those are the kind of conversations we want to bring about with this, the mental health portion of this podcast.